I really wanted to do a video on Sauron's story, kind of from his origin to the end, because when we watched the films, I think we met Sauron at the wrong point in his life. Because when most people think of Sauron, they picture an eye on top of a tower, a shadow watching from afar. I remember the first time I watched The Fellowship when Isildur cuts the ring from Sauron's hand. He seems to fall apart like there was no one inside that armor at all. Well, that's the feeling I got. And that's how most of us met him, through the Lord of the Rings films. I only read the books later because I fell in love with the films first. And because of that, Sauron always felt distant to me. Less like a person, more like a force or a presence, something like that. But the more I became exposed to the Tolkien world, it became clear that's not how Tolkien wrote him. As I started reading deeper into the legendarium, I realized something that completely changed how I understood Sauron. Or Sauron, however you prefer to pronounce it. Before the forging of the rings, before the Dark Tower, he wasn't a distant presence at all. And even near the end of the story, he isn't just a presence either. During Frodo's journey to destroy the ring, Sauron actually does have a physical form. Peter Jackson chose not to show that, and honestly, I think that was the right decision. Some things had to be omitted to make the films work as films, and they absolutely do. Books and movies don't always flow the same way, and if everything had been included, we'd probably be watching 8-hour movies. They actually did film a fight scene between Aragorn and Sauron, but wisely, it wasn't included in the final cut. But it does mean most viewers never get to meet Sauron the way Tolkien originally wrote him, which is a shame because it's best to meet him earlier in his life. Things are closer and more personal. Obviously, Rings of Power is trying to do that, but I think they might be failing. Personally, Rings of Power doesn't feel like Tolkien to me. It doesn't give me that same fizz that I get from the films or books, and that's a shame. Because when you see him from the beginning, you start to understand the full villain arc Tolkien created. So many legendary villains were born out of Tolkien's writings about Sauron. He is not just a Dark Lord at the end of the story, but a character who falls, learns, adapts, and becomes more dangerous over time. But that's the version of Sauron Tolkien wanted us to understand, and that's the story I want to tell. Welcome to Tolkien Reflections, a channel where we take deep dives into Tolkien's world and try to understand what the man himself was really exploring beneath the story. This is the first video in a 3-part series following the story of Sauron through the First, Second, and Third Ages. So let's start at the beginning. In the First Age, thousands of years before The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings, long before Gondor or Rohan, Tolkien's world is shaped by beings called the Valar. You can think of them as guardian powers of the world, each responsible for different aspects of creation. They shape the lands, guide the peoples of Middle-earth, and try, sometimes unsuccessfully, to keep things from falling apart. One of those Valar is Melkor, later known as Morgoth. Morgoth will become the first Dark Lord. He thinks he is too cool for school and rebels against the others, but it turns out he doesn't want to destroy the world. He wants to dominate it. He corrupts creation wherever he can, twisting what was meant to be beautiful into weapons, monsters, and fear. It's during this time that the elves first awaken in Middle-earth, and almost immediately, they become Morgoth's greatest enemies. He hunts them, imprisons them, and tries to break them, while the elves build kingdoms and resist him in open war. Most of this conflict takes place in a region called Beleriand, a vast land in the northwest of Middle-earth that no longer exists by the time of the Lord of the Rings. This is where the greatest elven realms rise, and where the war against Morgoth burns hottest. It's easy to notice that evil in the First Age is not subtle. It doesn't hide. And this is the world where Sauron first rises. Before he was called Sauron, his name was Mairon. Mairon is a Maia, a spirit of the same order as Gandalf or Saruman. He originally serves Aulë, the Vala associated with craftsmanship, structure, and the making of things. And Mairon wasn't just any apprentice. He was considered the mightiest smith in all of creation, second only to Aulë himself. So the guy was really, really good at making stuff. This matters because Tolkien does not write Sauron as someone who just loves chaos and destruction, like, for instance, the Joker. Mairon is shown to love order, systems, and control. He admires planning, efficiency, and the idea that the world should function according to a clear design. He wants the world to make sense, but just like any baddie, it's on his terms. Mairon had a love for order and a strong distaste for chaos and confusion, but this obsession would overtake his love for the other beings in the world, to the point where it becomes his sole focus. So much so that he starts to admire Melkor's power and his attempts to shape the world as he sees fit. Not because Morgoth is wise, and definitely not because Morgoth is right. Mairon is drawn to him for one reason: power. Morgoth is already dominating much of the world, and Mairon sees in him the means to impose order on a massive scale, so he joins him, and becomes his most trusted lieutenant, kind of like mini-me. Under Morgoth, Mairon becomes known as Gorthir, meaning terrible dread among the Sindar, and by his more common name, Sauron, meaning the abhorred in Quenya. In the earliest days of Middle-earth, Morgoth has two fortresses, Utumno and Angband. While Morgoth rules the greatest himself, he gives Sauron command of Angband. Under Morgoth, Sauron is given responsibility. He oversees fortresses, manages prisoners, and helps design systems meant to break resistance through fear. He learns how to make terror efficient. Remember, that guy really likes systems and efficiency. He turns cruelty into a process rather than an impulse. This is the moment Sauron learns a lesson he never forgets. Fear works. And once he understands that, he builds everything around it. After the destruction of the two lamps and the awakening of the elves, the Valar decide to move against Morgoth in what is known as the Battle of the Powers. This is primarily a siege upon Utumno. They capture Morgoth and chain him up. The Valar also search Angband. Sauron, however, evades their capture. He continues to dwell in Middle-earth, while his master is held captive in Valinor for roughly 2,850 years. We don't really know what Sauron did during those long years, but we know he wasn't binge-watching Friends and eating tacos. The guy was busy doing evil. After the elves awoke, many of them, the Eldar, embarked on the Great March, a long journey from the far east of Middle-earth all the way to Valinor. Some groups tried to linger in the Vales of Anduin along the way, but Sauron made that difficult. He forced them to press on, unable to settle. So even while his master was chained, Sauron was still poking at the world, watching, waiting, and making sure no one got too comfortable. That day eventually comes. The Valar give Morgoth a second chance, but being a bad guy, he uses it to steal the Silmarils, destroy the two trees, the sources of light for the world, and flee back to Beleriand. With the two trees destroyed, the Valar create the sun and moon, and as the sun rises for the first time, it marks the awakening of the second children of Ilúvatar, men. Morgoth sees an opportunity to corrupt these new beings to his will and travels east, leaving Sauron in command of the war between the dark forces and the elves of Beleriand. In the first 455 years of the First Age, Morgoth would only have fairly small victories against the elves, with the Free Peoples keeping the Dark Lord in check for the most part. In 455, however, Morgoth launches the Dagor Bragolach, the Battle of Sudden Flame. It devastates the plains of Anfauglith, the realm of Dorthonion, and marks the beginning of Morgoth's gradual march toward domination. Upon seeing the devastation across the plain, Fingolfin, the High King of the Noldor, gets really fired up and rides alone to Angband to challenge Morgoth to single combat. Despite putting up a remarkable fight and wounding Morgoth, Fingolfin is crushed by the Dark Lord. The death of the High King and the scorching of the plains opens the door for Sauron. As the wars of the First Age continue, Sauron moves south. He takes control of Tol Sirion, a strategically important island fortress that guards the main mountain pass between Morgoth's lands and western realms of Beleriand. Anyone moving through this region has to pass nearby, which makes Tol Sirion incredibly valuable. We are told that when Sauron shows, absolute fear falls upon Orodreth and the defenders of Tol Sirion. The realm falls to Sauron, and he takes control of the great tower of Minas Tirith in 457 of the First Age. Under Sauron's control, the fortress is renamed Tol-in-Gaurhoth, the Isle of Werewolves. This is an important event. Controlling this area opens the passage to the east of Beleriand to Morgoth's forces. But more than that, from here, Sauron begins operating with a level of independence. He isn't just carrying out Morgoth's orders anymore. He's running his own domain. And this is where his cruelty becomes much more personal. Sauron begins using deception, illusion, and psychological manipulation as weapons. He doesn't simply kill his enemies. He studies them, breaks them, turns their hope against them. Tol-in-Gaurhoth isn't just a fortress. It's his personal lab. And the werewolves he breeds there are a testament to that. Not simply monsters, Sauron is their master and their creator. These monstrous creatures were bred from the wolves of Morgoth, and Sauron imprisoned evil spirits within their bodies, creating something far worse. At times, Sauron also takes on the form of a wolf himself. He is also known to transform into a serpent and a vampire. One of the clearest examples of how Sauron operates during this period involves a man named Gorlim. After the Daegor Bragolach, Beren, his father, Barahir, and a group of men operated as outlaws in their former lands of Dorthonion. Hearing of the actions of these men, Morgoth orders Sauron to wipe them out. Sauron's orcs managed to capture Gorlim, one of Barahir's followers, after he saw what he thought was his wife, which was an illusion, who had been missing since the Bragolach. They torture him to find out where Barahir is hiding. But Gorlim wouldn't break, so they promised him he should be released and restored to his wife if he would spill the beans. So they bring him before Sauron. Sauron uses illusion against him. He shows Gorlim a vision of his dead wife, alive again, waiting for him. He promises reunion if Gorlim reveals Barahir's location. Being worn out with pain and really missing his wife, Gorlim gives in. Then Sauron smiled. He mocked Gorlim and revealed to him that he had only seen a phantom devised by wizardry to entrap him. His wife was dead. "Nonetheless, I will grant thy prayer," said Sauron, "and thou shalt go to Eilunel and be set free of my service." Then he put him cruelly to death. This is classic Sauron. Hope twisted into a weapon. He doesn't just defeat his enemies, he makes sure they break first. In 460 of the First Age, Sauron sends a force of orcs to the outlaws' hideout of Tarn Eluin, where all are killed, except Beren. Beren wasn't with them when they died, but he doesn't run. He tracks down the very orcs that carried out the attack and goes Rambo on every last one of them. In doing so, he recovers something from his father's body and the ring of Barahir. A ring that will be passed down through the ages, and if you know your Tolkien, you know exactly whose finger it ends up on in the Third Age. Beren continues to operate in the area as a lone outlaw, kicking ass and taking names against the forces of the Dark Lord. In response, Morgoth sets a high price on Beren's head, leading Sauron to send out a great army of werewolves and fell beasts to search for him. Beren says, "I'm out of here," and heads south, where he meets Luthien, daughter of Thingol, king of Doriath. Beren and Luthien fall in love and want to marry, but Thingol sets what seems like an impossible bride price. Beren must recover a Silmaril from the Iron Crown of Morgoth himself. The Silmarils are ancient jewels containing the light of the two trees of Valinor, among the most important objects in Tolkien's world. Morgoth stole them and set them into his crown. But before Beren can even attempt this impossible task, there is a more immediate problem. Sauron, he controls the pass. There is no way he can get to Morgoth without going through Sauron. Now, One of the most important figures standing against Sauron at this point is Finrod Felagund. Finrod is an elven king of the Noldor, ruler of the hidden realm of Nargothrond. He is known not just for his power, but for his wisdom, restraint, and compassion. Traits Tolkien clearly values. Finrod also has a personal reason to oppose Sauron. Years earlier, Barahir, Berin's father, again saved Finrod's life. Finrod swore an oath of friendship in return, and that oath extends to Barahir's descendants. So when Barahir is hunted down and killed, and Beren becomes a hunted outlaw, Finrod does not forget his promise. In 465 of the First Age, Beren's quest brings him, Finrod, and a group of 10 elves to attempt the passage north, straight past Sauron's Isle of Werewolves. The group gets some orc clothes, and Finrod uses his magic to make their faces look like orcs as well. But Sauron had ordered all who passed to report to him. When he notices this band of orcs passing without reporting, they are captured and brought before him. What follows is one of the weirdest confrontations Tolkien ever wrote. I was thinking, yeah, they drop the act and there will be a battle, that kind of stuff. Instead, Finrod and Sauron engage in what Tolkien calls a song of power. They sing of memory and history, of the making of the world, of hope, loss, betrayal, and lies. Both possess great strength in this, but Sauron is better. At first, Finrod rocks out doing his thing, but Sauron twists the song. He introduces corruption into it. He bends truth until it breaks, turning memory into despair. Slowly, Finrod is overwhelmed and the group loses their magical disguises. But Sauron cannot determine who they are or what their purpose is, and they were keeping their mouths shut. So Sauron throws all 12 of them into a dark pit. Sauron needs them to talk, so he gets a werewolf to eat Finrod's companions one by one. But still, no one says anything. Even as they are consumed one by one, the guys won't betray one another, until only Finrod and Beren left. And here's the thing. That wasn't an accident. Sauron had deliberately kept Finrod alive longer than the others. He was convinced that Finrod, being one of the great Noldor kings, must be the one holding the real secret, the true reason behind this whole mission. When it's Beren's turn to become lunch, Finrod breaks his chains and fights the creature with his bare hands. Using every bit of power left to him, he kills the werewolf and saves Beren. But the poor guy is mortally wounded in the process. Finrod dies in the darkness of Sauron's dungeon, far from his kingdom, keeping his oath to the very end. This is one of the quietest deaths in Tolkien's world, and one of the bravest. Beren eventually escapes Tol-in-Gaurhoth, but Sauron is no longer part of the background war. He is now the lock on the door. Luthien gets upset about what Sauron has done and makes a decision to go to Tol-in-Gaurhoth, not to conquer Morgoth's power, but to remove Sauron from the path entirely. Lúthien is the daughter of Thingol and Melian, a Maia of the same order as Sauron. She is not just elven, she is part divine, so she is kind of a badass. Her companion is Huan, the great hound of Valinor, sent to Middle-earth by the Valar and bound by prophecy. He can speak only 3 times, and he is fated to die only at the hands of the greatest wolf that will ever live. Not your average puppy. Lúthien comes to the bridge of Tol-in-Gaurhoth with Huan and begins to sing. Sauron sees her from his tower of Minas Tirith and knows her to be the daughter of Melian and Thingol. Rather than kill her, he wishes to capture her, so that he can deliver her to Morgoth as a prize and score some points. Sauron sends his werewolves first. Huan kills them all. Every single one. Until Sauron is forced to send Draugluin, the great father of the werewolves. After a fierce battle with the hound, Draugluin flees, telling Sauron of Huan's power before he dies. Sauron sends no more servants. He will take this battle himself. Sauron takes the form of a werewolf, said to be the greatest the world had ever seen. And here's what makes this move so interesting. Remember earlier, we said Huan was bound by prophecy to die only at the hands of the greatest wolf that would ever live. Sauron knew that prophecy. Everyone in that land did. And when Lúthien died and told him about Huan, something clicked. Sauron looked at that fate and thought, that's me. I'm the one who fulfills it. So he doesn't just take werewolf form out of desperation. He does it because he genuinely believes he can end Huan for good. Sauron comes down to the bridge and leaps at Luthien, but she draws her magic veil over his eyes, blinding and fatiguing him. It is said Luthien is left weak and very nearly unconscious just from Sauron's malice alone. Huan then leaps upon Sauron and they really go at it for a long time. While Sauron fights fiercely, he just can't beat Huan. Eventually, Huan grabs him with his jaws and refuses to let go. Have you ever tried to take something out your dog's mouth? Same sort of thing? Sauron tries to get away and changes into a serpent, but Huan bites down even harder. Eventually, Sauron is forced back into his own dark form. And here, Sauron is faced with a choice. As an immortal spirit, he could abandon his physical form entirely. But as we see in later ages, it takes a very long time for him to regain one. Instead, he gives control of the Isle to Luthien in exchange for Luthien letting him go. But it's not just a simple surrender. Luthien gives him an ultimatum. She threatens that if he doesn't hand over his tower, his naked spirit will be cast back to Morgoth, left to suffer endlessly, stripped of everything. No body, no power, just torment. And that's enough to scare him into a choice. He gives up the tower. He relinquishes Tol-in-Gaurhoth, and he flees, humiliated, taking the form of a vampire and escaping to Tol-in-Huan, where it is said he fills the forest with horror. And once Sauron is gone, Luthien doesn't just walk away. She throws open the gates of the fortress, frees every prisoner still chained in the dungeons, recovers Finrod's body, and then, for good measure, tears Minas Tirith down to rubble. The Isle sits quiet after that, until Morgoth eventually retakes it. Huan survives, of course. The prophecy surrounding his death is not fulfilled here like Sauron thought. But Sauron never forgets this defeat. 80 years later, in 545 of the First Age, the host of the West, led by the Maia comes to Beleriand in an effort to overthrow Morgoth. What follows is the 40-year War of Wrath, an unimaginable battle with uncountable combatants and devastation throughout the lands of Beleriand. In the end, Angband is destroyed. Morgoth is once again captured, bound in chains, his crown is beaten into a collar, and he is cast into the void. Sauron, knowing he might be next, takes on a fair form and approaches Eowyn, the herald of the Valar. Tolkien tells us he really feels shame, and for a moment repentance seems possible. Eowyn orders Sauron to return to Valinor, where he may repent to Manwë and receive judgment. But Sauron fears judgment, and there is no way he wants to be humiliated like that, so instead of returning to Valinor to face what awaits him, Sauron heads east, into Middle-earth to hide, choosing survival over forgiveness. With Melkor defeated, this marks the end of the First Age. Sauron is not yet the Dark Lord we know. There is no ring, no Nazgul. He is completely defeated, hiding from judgment. And instead of disappearing, he learns. Before the ring, Sauron was cruel. After this moment, he becomes careful. And that's when he becomes truly dangerous. Next time we investigate Sauron in the Second Age, how he doesn't come back stronger. He comes back smarter. And this time, no one sees him coming. Thanks for watching. If there's anything I missed or anything you'd like to add, I'd love to read it in the comments. Until next time.